Nobody in the galaxy took humans seriously, and that was exactly how the humans wanted it. For 300 years, humanity had lived among the stars as a small and quiet species, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the Orion Spur, with only 12 colony worlds to their name, while 5 great empires carved up the rest of the galaxy between them like a meal they refused to share. The Vel'Karath Dominion was the most aggressive of them all, a civilization of towering reptilian warriors who believed that war was the highest form of politics, and that every border was simply a line waiting to be pushed forward. The Silthari Concord was a vast network of insectoid psionics who could read thoughts, bend emotions, and crush a mind from across a room without ever lifting a limb. The Orani hegemony was the oldest empire, an ancient amphibian civilization that had been building bureaucracies and writing laws since before most species had learned to use fire. Dreth Confederacy was made of silicon-based traders who sold weapons to everyone and loyalty to no one, always finding a way to profit from the wars of others. And the Yithon Collective was a hive mind of aquatic beings who controlled every major communication network in the galaxy, listening to everything, saying very little, and knowing far more than they ever revealed. Among these giants, humanity was considered barely worth noticing, a species of soft and fragile creatures who had somehow stumbled into space travel without ever developing anything impressive enough to matter. Galactic intelligence reports estimated that humanity possessed fewer than 200 light frigates and patrol ships, enough to guard their own tiny borders, but nothing that would ever threaten anyone. Humans were hired as cheap labor on mining stations, recruited as expendable mercenaries for wars they had no stake in, and occasionally mocked at diplomatic gatherings for their short lifespans and emotional instability. They had no seat on the Galactic Quorum, the council where the 5 empires decided the fate of the galaxy, and no empire had ever seriously considered offering them one. This was the state of things when the Vel'Karath Dominion turned its hungry eyes toward a small human colony world called Elysium 4. The reason was simple. Elysium 4 sat on top of one of the richest deposits of Aetherium ever discovered, a rare element that powered every FTL drive core in the galaxy, and the Vel'Karath wanted it badly enough to take it by force. They invented a justification, accusing the humans of sheltering Vel'Karath political dissidents, a charge that was entirely false, but convenient enough to serve as a reason for invasion. And so an armada was assembled, 800 warships strong, including 3 planet crackers, massive vessels designed to split a world apart from orbit, and it jumped into the Elysium system with the kind of overwhelming force that was meant to make resistance unthinkable. The fleet arranged itself in a wide crescent formation above the planet, blotting out the stars, and its commander, a decorated veteran named Warlord Dran Vorseth, broadcast a surrender ultimatum on all frequencies. He gave the colony 6 hours to lay down its arms, evacuate all government officials, and transfer full control of the planet to the Vel'Karath Dominion. If they refused, he promised, the planet crackers would reduce Elysium 4 to rubble and dust. Across the galaxy, the other empires watched with mild interest, some of them quietly pleased that the humans were about to be humbled, and none of them lifting a finger to help. The Orani noted the event in their diplomatic logs. The Dreth calculated the potential shift in Aetherium market prices, and the Silthari simply observed, curious to see how a lesser species would handle despair. On Elysium 4, 3 million human colonists looked up at the sky and saw the armada hanging above them like a ceiling of iron and fire. And then humanity responded. Ambassador Lena Vasquez, the senior human diplomatic representative in the system, transmitted a single message to Warlord Vorseth, her voice calm and measured, almost polite, carrying the kind of quiet certainty that made several Velkarath bridge officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You were not invited," she said. "You will leave. This is not a request." The Velkarath command bridge erupted in laughter. Vorseth himself baring his fangs in amusement at the absurdity of the species, with no army, no fleet, and no allies telling him what to do. He ordered his ships into attack formation and began the advance toward the planet. That was when every sensor on every ship in the system went insane. It started as a low hum in the instruments, a strange vibration that the engineers could not explain, and then the readings began to spike in ways that should not have been possible. Gravity was bending, light was warping, and a region of supposedly empty space between the Armada and the planet was doing something that no Velkarath scientist had ever seen before. The void itself seemed to crack open. Reality folded back like a curtain being drawn, and from behind it came something that stopped every voice on every ship in the fleet mid-sentence. It was not a fleet. It was one ship. The UHS Prometheus emerged from a stealth field that had hidden it for over 40 years, a field so advanced that it had bent gravity and light around the vessel like water flowing around a stone in a river. The ship was 37 kilometers long, larger than most space stations, larger than anything any species had ever built for war, and its hull was covered in a material so dark that it seemed to swallow light itself, making the ship look less like a vessel and more like a wound carved into the fabric of space. Weapon systems lined its surface in rows and clusters, thousands of them, designs that no galactic database could identify, technologies that had no match in any known civilization's arsenal. Every empire's intelligence network failed in the same heartbeat, because not one of them, not the spies, not the analysts, not the psionics, not the communication interceptors, had ever detected even a whisper of this ship's existence. The Prometheus broadcast on all frequencies, and a voice filled every bridge in the system, calm and unhurried, almost gentle, belonging to a woman who sounded like she had all the time in the universe. "This is Captain Marin Cole of the United Human Ship Prometheus," she said. "Warlord Vorseth, you have entered a protected system. You now have 6 minutes to begin your withdrawal. After that, I will no longer be speaking." The transmission ended. 800 Velkarath warships hung in the silence of space. And for the first time in his long and violent career, Warlord Dran Vorseth did not immediately know what to do. Warlord Vorseth stared at the thing that had appeared in front of his fleet, and felt something he had not felt since he was a hatchling, something cold and unwelcome crawling up his spine. But he was a Velkarath, and the Velkarath did not retreat from a single ship, no matter how large it was. His officers were whispering among themselves, their scales shifting to pale shades that betrayed their unease. And several of them suggested caution, recommended pulling back to reassess, urged him to contact High Command before making a decision. Vorseth silenced them with a snarl. He had 800 warships, 3 planet crackers, and enough combined firepower to turn a small moon into gravel. And he was not about to be intimidated by one vessel and one calm voice, no matter how impressive the entrance had been. "All ships," he commanded, his voice filling the fleet-wide channel. "Target that vessel. Full barrage. Every weapon fire at will." 100 warships opened fire at the same time. The space around the Prometheus lit up like a dying star, as hundreds of capital-grade plasma lances stabbed toward it, in blinding lines of white and blue, as mass driver rounds the size of buildings hurtled through the void at terrifying speed, and as volley after volley of antimatter torpedoes spiraled in from every angle, each one carrying enough destructive force to vaporize a city. The combined firepower was staggering, the kind of sustained assault that could crack continents and boil oceans, the kind of attack that no known vessel in the galaxy could survive. Every shot hit. The Prometheus did not move, did not dodge, did not attempt any evasive maneuver at all. and simply sat there and took the full weight of everything the Velkarath fleet could throw at it. The barrage lasted for nearly a full minute, and when it finally stopped, and the light faded, and the sensors cleared, every officer, on every ship in the fleet, leaned forward to see the result. The Prometheus was completely undamaged. There was not a scratch on its hull, not a flicker in its energy signature, not a single indication that anything had happened to it at all. And it sat in the silence of space, looking exactly the same as it had before 800 warships had tried to kill it. Whatever was protecting that ship, it was not any kind of shield technology that existed in any galactic database. It operated on principles that no species understood, and it had treated the most devastating attack the Velkarath could deliver as if it were nothing more than a light breeze against a mountain. The silence on the Velkarath command bridge was absolute. Officers stared at their screens. Engineers ran diagnostics they already knew would not explain anything, and weapons specialists looked at each other with the wide eyes of professionals who had just watched their entire purpose become meaningless. Vorseth gripped the arms of his command chair, so hard that the metal creaked under his claws. And then the 6 minutes were over. Captain Marin Cole's voice returned on all frequencies, quieter now, carrying a weight that had not been there before, the tone of someone who had offered a chance and watched it be refused. 6 minutes have passed, she said simply. The Prometheus activated its weapons. What happened next lasted exactly 11 seconds, and it changed the galaxy forever. Beams of energy lanced out from the Prometheus in every direction simultaneously. Not dozens of them, but thousands, each one a focused line of light in a color that no one watching could quite name. Something between violet and white that seemed to burn itself into the eyes of anyone who looked directly at it. Each beam was precision-targeted with accuracy that should not have been possible at that scale, striking with surgical exactness at specific systems on specific ships across a fleet that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. In those 11 seconds, the 3 planet crackers were bisected, cut cleanly in half by beams that sliced through their massive hulls as if the armor plating were made of wet paper. And both halves of each ship went dark and began to drift apart in slow and eerie silence. In those 11 seconds, 462 warships were disabled, not destroyed, but crippled with a precision that was almost artistic in its cruelty. Engines severed cleanly from hulls, weapons arrays melted into shapeless slag, command bridges isolated from the rest of each ship by cuts so precise that the surrounding corridors were left untouched. Every single one of those disabled ships retained its life support systems, its emergency power, its crew quarters, and everything needed to keep its crew alive. Because the Prometheus had not simply attacked the fleet, it had performed surgery on them. The remaining ships, those that had been held in reserve at the back of the formation, were left completely untouched, not because the Prometheus could not reach them, but because leaving them unharmed sent a message that was louder than any weapon. We could have taken every single one of you, and we chose not to. In 11 seconds, nearly 60% of a Velkarath armada had been rendered helpless, and the death toll was 0. Not one Velkarath crew member had been killed, not one life had been taken. And somehow that was the most terrifying part of all, because a weapon that could destroy with that kind of power was frightening. But a weapon that could choose not to destroy with that kind of power was something else entirely, something that the galaxy had no framework to understand. Within hours, the footage reached every corner of the galaxy. Observation drones from every major empire had been watching the Elysium system, and recordings of the engagements spread through intelligence agencies and military commands, and government chambers like fire through dry grass. The reactions were immediate, and varied, and uniformly shaken. The Orani hegemony convened an emergency session of the Galactic Quorum before the day was over, their ancient leaders sitting in stunned silence, as they watched a species they had dismissed for 3 centuries demonstrate technology that made their own look primitive. The Dreth Confederacy tore apart every record of every trade deal they had ever made with humans, searching desperately for some clue, some hint, some sign they had missed that might explain where this technology had come from, and they found nothing, not a single trace, which frightened them more than the weapons themselves. The Silthari Concord sent their most powerful psionics to probe the Prometheus from across the galaxy, reaching out with minds that could usually touch anything within 1,000 light-years, and every single one of them hit a wall, a psionic dead zone around the ship that was so complete and so absolute that their consciousness simply slid off it like water off polished glass. And 3 of them suffered nosebleeds and 1 collapsed into a coma that lasted 2 days. The Yithon Collective, who listened to everything, replayed the engagement recordings over and over, and the detail that disturbed them most was not the weapons or the shields, but the voice of Captain Cole, because her heart rate, as measured by the audio analysis, had not increased by a single beat during the entire engagement. She had not been afraid. She had not been excited. She had not been uncertain. She had simply done a job she had been trained to do. And that level of calm spoke of preparation that went back not years, but decades. And in the wreckage of his crippled fleet, surrounded by the drifting halves of his planet crackers and the silent shells of his disabled warships, Warlord Dran Vorseth sat in his command chair and stared at nothing. A new transmission arrived. Not from Captain Cole this time, but from Ambassador Lena Vasquez, the same woman who had told him to leave, and it contained only a single question. Do you require humanitarian assistance? We have medical ships en route. Vorseth closed his eyes. His career was over, his fleet was broken, and the universe he thought he understood had revealed itself to be something far stranger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He accepted the help. He had no other choice. The Galactic Quorum Chamber was the largest diplomatic hall ever built, a vast dome of polished stone and living crystal on the neutral world of Thessera Prime, where the 5 great empires had gathered for centuries to argue and threaten and occasionally agree on things that benefited all of them. It had never been this quiet. Representatives from every empire sat in their designated sections, surrounded by advisors and generals and intelligence chiefs, and all of them were staring at the center of the chamber, where a single human man stood alone under the light. His name was Admiral Jonah Mwangi, and he was 73 years old, with short gray hair and deep brown eyes that carried the kind of calm that came not from ignorance, but from knowing exactly how much danger he was in and having made peace with it a long time ago. He wore a simple dark uniform with no medals and no decorations, and he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, shouting to stop. And there had been a great deal of shouting. The Velkarath ambassador had demanded immediate sanctions against humanity, calling the Prometheus an illegal weapon of mass destruction, and its concealment an act of war against the entire galactic community. The Oranai had called it a violation of the Galactic Transparency Accords, a set of ancient agreements that required all quorum-eligible species to disclose their military capabilities. The Dreth had called it an unfair market disruption, which was the Dreth way of saying they were terrified. The Silthari had said nothing, which was somehow worse, and the Yithon had simply listened, as they always did, recording everything, revealing nothing. When the noise finally died down, Admiral Mwangi spoke, and his voice was not loud, but it filled the chamber in a way that made every translator drone lean forward to capture each word. He told them the truth, or at least the parts of the truth he had decided they were ready to hear. Humanity had possessed advanced weapons and stealth technology for over a century, he explained, developed in secret laboratories, hidden deep within human space. in facilities buried inside asteroids and moons and gas-giant atmospheres where no scanner could reach. The decision to develop these technologies in secret had been made by the first generation of human leaders to encounter the galactic community. Leaders who had looked at the five empires and seen a galaxy where the only currency that mattered was the ability to destroy, and who had understood immediately that revealing human capabilities too early would be catastrophic. A young species showing up with advanced weapons would have been seen as a threat and destroyed before it could grow, and a young species without weapons would have been conquered and absorbed. So humanity had chosen a third path, the path of patience, building its strength in shadow, while presenting a harmless face to the galaxy. The Prometheus was not a prototype, Mwangi continued, and it was not unique. When the chamber erupted with demands to know how many such ships existed and where they were stationed, Mwangi simply looked at the assembled representatives and said one word: enough. The Oranai ambassador, a senior diplomat named Thesson, who had been navigating galactic politics for longer than most human nations had existed, leaned forward in her seat and asked the question that everyone wanted answered. Why reveal yourselves now, Admiral? Why not continue hiding? Mwangi's expression did not change. Because someone attacked our people, he said, and we do not hide behind our children. The Velkarath ambassador slammed a clawed fist on his console and called for humanity to be expelled from all galactic affairs, stripped of trade rights, and blockaded until they surrendered their technology. Outburst to end and then spoke again. Every empire in this room built its power through conquest or secrecy or exploitation, he said. Humanity built its power through patience. You're not angry that we hid, you are angry that it worked. The chamber fell silent again because every ambassador in the room knew he was right. In the days and weeks that followed, the galaxy turned itself inside out trying to understand what humanity had become. Intelligence agencies from every empire went into overdrive, pulling apart every scrap of information they had ever collected about human civilization, and finding that all of it was useless, because all of it had been carefully curated to show exactly what humanity wanted the galaxy to see. The Ython Collective, which controlled the vast majority of galactic communications infrastructure, began secretly scanning all human communication traffic, intercepting transmissions, analyzing data patterns, searching for anything that might reveal the location of hidden shipyards or weapons facilities. They found nothing unusual at all. Human communications appeared to be completely normal, full of mundane chatter about trade and weather and entertainment and family. And this meant one of two things. Either humanity had no more secrets, or human encryption was so far beyond Ython capability that the Ython could not even detect that encryption was being used. Neither possibility was comforting. The Silthari Concord took a different approach and dispatched their most elite psionic operatives into human space. Agents capable of reading thoughts through walls and extracting memories from sleeping minds and influencing decisions without the target ever knowing they had been compromised. Every single operative reported the same thing. Human minds were chaotic and noisy and layered in ways that made them nearly impossible to read clearly. Not because of any technological defense, but because human consciousness itself was naturally turbulent, a storm of emotions and memories and competing thoughts that tangled together in ways that psionic probes could not sort through. The Silthari had always known this about humans, and had always dismissed it as a sign of primitive neural development, the mental equivalent of static on a broken radio. But now they looked at it with new eyes and saw something very different. It was not a weakness. It was an evolutionary advantage, a natural defense against the most powerful intelligence-gathering method in the galaxy, and it meant that humanity had been functionally immune to psionic espionage from the very beginning. Several minor species, small civilizations that had spent centuries being bullied and exploited by the great empires, began quietly reaching out to humanity through back channels, sending careful messages through intermediaries, asking whether humanity might be interested in alliances, or whether human commerce protection might be available for those who needed it. Humanity responded to every single one of them. The Orani hegemony, the most politically sophisticated of the empires, watched all of this, and decided to make a move that was clever enough to be worthy of their 10,000-year legacy of manipulation. They proposed a grand diplomatic solution, a gesture of reconciliation that would give humanity a permanent seat on the galactic quorum itself, elevating them from a minor species to a recognized galactic power, with full voting rights and diplomatic standing. The only condition was that humanity would be required to make full disclosure of all military assets, the same requirement that applied to all quorum members under the Transparency Accords. It was a trap disguised as a gift, because the moment humanity revealed the full extent of its military capabilities, the mystery would be gone, the uncertainty would vanish, and the empires would finally be able to calculate exactly how much force would be needed to overwhelm human defenses. Ambassador Vasquez and Admiral Mwangi saw through it in seconds, and their counter-proposal was elegant in its simplicity. They accepted the quorum seat, they rejected the disclosure requirement, and they offered instead a mutual defense pact. Any species that signed the pact and was attacked without provocation would receive human military support, no questions asked, no inventory of human weapons required. The empires were caught in a trap of their own making, because refusing the pact would make them look like aggressors planning future conquests, and accepting the pact would legitimize human power without ever revealing its limits. And deep in human space, in a shipyard hidden inside the hollowed-out core of an asteroid that appeared on no map and in no database, a young technician in a clean white uniform ran a final diagnostic on a row of 12 ships. To the Prometheus. She finished her report and filed it under a project name that had never been spoken aloud outside of human military command. A name that would one day become the most important word in galactic history. Project Aegis, Cohort 9 of 14. She paused at her console, did the math in her head, and allowed herself a small, quiet smile. 6 months had passed since the battle at Elysium, and the galaxy had entered a new kind of war, one fought not with weapons, but with doubt. Every empire was spending enormous resources trying to uncover the full truth about humanity, and every attempt was failing in ways that only deepened the fear. The Dreth Confederacy made the first bold move, announcing a full trade embargo on all Aetherium shipments to human systems, a strategy designed to choke human FTL capability at its source, because every species in the galaxy depended on Aetherium to power their faster-than-light drives, and without it, no fleet could move between stars. It was a ruthless plan, the kind of economic warfare the Dreth had perfected over millennia, and they were confident it would force humanity to the negotiating table within weeks. It lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, long-range sensors across Dreth space detected human ships traveling at full FTL speed through regions where no Aetherium supply lines existed, and when Dreth analysts examined the engine signatures of these ships, they found something that made their silicon-based hearts go cold. The human ships were not using Aetherium-based drives at all. They were moving through space using an entirely different propulsion system, one that operated on principles the Dreth could not identify, and that required no fuel source the galaxy could control or cut off. Humanity had not merely stockpiled Aetherium, they had made it obsolete, and they had apparently done so long enough ago that the transition was already complete. The Dreth embargo collapsed overnight. Their stock markets crashed to levels not seen in 3 centuries, and the most powerful trading civilization in the galaxy was left staring at the ruins of a strategy that had been dead before it began. But the most dangerous reaction was happening behind closed doors, in encrypted channels between the Vel-Karath Dominion and the Yithon Collective. Warlord Vor-Seth had been stripped of his command and publicly disgraced. But the Vel-Karath military establishment had not abandoned its appetite for conquest. It had simply decided to be smarter about it. A new plan was taking shape, one called Operation Sunfall, and it was built on a single premise that the Valkarath believed to be unassailable. One ship, no matter how powerful, could not be everywhere at once. Even if humanity had a dozen ships like the Prometheus, or even 50, they could not possibly defend every human colony world simultaneously. And so the plan was simple in its brutality. A coordinated strike by a combined fleet of over 12,000 warships launched simultaneously against every known human colony, overwhelming humanity's defenses through sheer numbers and forcing them to choose which worlds to save and which to sacrifice. The Ython Collective had agreed to participate because they controlled the communication networks and could ensure perfect coordination between the attack fleets. And because the Ython had calculated that a galaxy with an unknown human superpower was a galaxy they could not predict. And the Ython hated what they could not predict. Preparations moved forward in absolute secrecy, or what the conspirators believed was absolute secrecy. It was not. Admiral Mwangi requested a private audience with Archon Sylvan, the supreme leader of the Oranai hegemony, and the oldest living head of state in the galaxy. A being who had guided her civilization through 4 major wars and 11 political crises, and who had seen more of history than most species had lived. Sylvan agreed to the meeting out of curiosity, because Mwangi fascinated her in a way that few beings ever had. And they met in a small room on a neutral station, just the two of them, with no guards and no recording devices. Mwangi told her that humanity knew about Operation Sunfall. Not tell her how they knew, and she did not ask, because asking would have revealed the depths of her own ignorance, and Sylvan had not survived 10,000 years of politics by showing weakness. Instead, she asked him what he intended to do about it. Mwangi was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried something she had not heard from a human before. Something that sounded like grief. "We studied your histories," he said, "all of you, every empire, every civilization that rose and fell in this galaxy over the last 100,000 years, and we found the same pattern every time. A species gains power, it uses that power to conquer, it grows arrogant, it overreaches, and it falls, and the cycle begins again with whoever is left standing in the wreckage." He looked at her directly, and she saw in his eyes the weight of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for a moment he had hoped would never come. "We decided we would not follow that pattern," he continued. "We built weapons we hoped we would never use. We hid not out of fear, but out of respect for what power does to those who wield it openly, because we had seen what it did to all of you." Sylvan felt something shift inside her, a crack in the ancient armor of cynicism she had worn for so long that she had forgotten it was there. "If Sunfall launches," Mwangi said, and his voice was steady, but she could hear the effort it took to keep it that way, "we will end it, quickly. But this time I cannot promise the same restraint we showed at Elysium. When you strike at someone's home, at their children, you change the calculation. You turn a shield into a sword, and I am not sure we could turn it back." For the first time in centuries, Archon Sylvan felt genuine fear, not of the weapons humanity had built, but of what humanity might become if the galaxy forced them to use those weapons without mercy. She left the meeting and immediately contacted the Vel-Karath and the Ython through channels so secure that even her own government did not know they existed. And she used every ounce of political leverage she had accumulated over 10 millennia of leadership to delay Operation Sunfall. She could not cancel it. The momentum was too great and the Vel-Karath desire for revenge too strong. But she could slow it down, buy time, create complications in the logistics, and she did. Back in human space, the decision of what to do next was tearing humanity's leadership apart from the inside. General Kira Tanaka, the commander of Project Aegis, and the woman responsible for every hidden warship in the galaxy, argued with a soldier's directness that the time for shadows was over, that the empires would never stop probing and scheming and planning attacks. and that the only way to end the threat permanently was to reveal the full Aegis fleet in one overwhelming display of force that would leave no room for doubt. "Show them everything," she urged in a closed session of the Human Defense Council. "Deploy every ship, decloak the entire network, let them see it all at once, and they will never dare to move against us again." Captain Marin Cole, watching the meeting via secure link from the bridge of the Prometheus, pushed back hard. "The moment we show our full hand, we become the thing we swore we would never be," she said. "An empire ruling through fear, and every species in the galaxy will either submit to us or unite against us, and either outcome destroys what we have been trying to build." Admiral Mwangi listened to both of them and made his decision. They would reveal one more card, not the whole hand, but enough to change the game. Weeks later, along every invasion route that Operation Sunfall had planned to use, sensors began detecting anomalies, faint gravity distortions so subtle that most instruments would have missed them entirely, light that lasted only fractions of a second before disappearing. The kind of readings that most analysts would dismiss as instrument noise or background fluctuations. But the Vel'Karath analysts recognized them, because they had seen readings exactly like these once before, in the moments just before the Prometheus had revealed itself at Elysium. The anomalies were everywhere, not just along the invasion routes, but scattered across the spaces between them, forming a web that covered every approach to every human system. And when the analysts expanded their search, they found more of them, dozens, possibly hundreds, distributed across a volume of space so vast that mapping them all would take years. A Vel'Karath scout commander sat alone in the dim light of his sensor station, watching the anomalies blink in and out of detectability on his display, and his scales had gone a shade of pale that his species only turned when they were confronting something they could not yet comprehend, not fight, and could not flee from. He opened a channel to High Command and spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "They know," he said. "They have always known, and they are already there." Operation Sunfall died the way all plans built on arrogance die. Not with a battle, but with the slow and humiliating realization that it had never had a chance. Scout reports flooded in from every invasion corridor, every staging area, every approach vector that the combined Vel'Karath and Ethon forces had planned to use. And every single report said the same thing. The gravity anomalies were there, waiting, silent, invisible to the naked eye, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. And then, the reports got worse. The anomalies were not limited to the routes toward human space. They were also present in the space surrounding the core systems of every major empire, drifting in the darkness around Vel'Karath homeworlds and Ethon communication hubs and Dreth trading stations and Silthari nesting worlds, and even the ancient capital of the Oranai hegemony itself. If the readings were accurate, and no one could prove they were not, positioned warships in the heart of every galactic power for years, perhaps decades, sitting in silence, watching everything, and choosing every single day not to act. No one could confirm that each anomaly was a ship. No one could scan through the stealth fields to verify what was hiding behind them. And no one could be sure that some of the anomalies were not decoys designed to multiply the illusion. And that was precisely the point. Uncertainty was humanity's greatest weapon, and they wielded it with a precision that made their energy beams look clumsy by comparison. The Yathan Collective quietly withdrew from Operation Sunfall without ever publicly acknowledging they had been part of it, their hive calculations having determined that the probability of success had dropped below any threshold that justified the risk. The Vel'Karath military command fractured into factions, with half the leadership arguing for retreat, and the other half paralyzed by the inability to accept that their species had been outmaneuvered by creatures they had considered prey. And then Warlord Vorseth disgraced but not broken, did what desperate and prideful beings have always done throughout history. He acted alone. Gathering 300 warships crewed by loyalists who shared his fury, Warship launched a rogue assault toward the nearest human colony, ignoring the orders of his own government, ignoring the warnings from every intelligence analyst in his fleet, driven by nothing but rage and the refusal to accept that the universe had changed in ways he could not control. His fleet made it 4 light-years before every ship dropped out of FTL at the same instant. They were yanked from hyperspace by a gravity well that appeared from nowhere, a massive distortion in the fabric of space that grabbed the fleet like a hand catching insects, and pulled them back into normal space in a region of empty void, far from any star or planet. The sensors recalibrated, and the crews recovered from the violent deceleration. They found themselves surrounded. 6 Prometheus-class warships hung in the darkness around them. All of them decloaked, all of them fully visible, each one 37 kilometers of dark hull and silent weapons, forming a ring around the Valkarath fleet with the patient stillness of predators who had already decided the outcome. Captain Marin Cole was among them, and she opened a channel with the same calm voice that had become the most recognized sound in the galaxy. "Warlord," she said, "we have done this before. I would rather not do it again." The silence that followed lasted almost a full minute. Then, Warship's own officers turned on him. Bridge commanders across his fleet locked him out of the command systems. Weapons officers powered down their batteries, and the captains of his 3 largest warships broadcast their surrender on open channels, choosing survival and sanity over one old warrior's dying pride. Warship was taken into custody by his own people, and the fleet was escorted out of the area by 2 of the Prometheus-class ships, gently, almost courteously, the way a parent might guide a lost child back home. The emergency session of the Galactic Quorum that followed was the most important diplomatic gathering in the history of the known galaxy. All 5 empires attended, and for the first time, humanity sat among them as an equal. Their delegation led by Admiral Mwangi, who walked into the chamber, looking like a man who had not slept in months, but who carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew that the next few hours would determine the shape of the future. He addressed the assembly, and the chamber was so silent that the soft hum of the translation drones sounded like thunder. He told them about Project Aegis. Not everything, not the full count of ships or the exact locations of hidden assets, but enough to make the scale of what humanity had built undeniable. He showed them the footage of 6 Prometheus-class warships surrounding Warship's fleet, and confirmed that additional assets existed beyond what was shown, and let the implications settle over the chamber like a weight. He told them that every Aegis asset was defensive in nature, that no hidden ship had ever been used to spy on or sabotage or attack any species, that every vessel had been positioned to intercept and protect, never to invade. And then he offered proof, full sensor logs from every Aegis ship that humanity was willing to reveal, decades of recordings showing nothing but silence and patience, years upon years of watching and waiting and choosing over and over and over again not to fire first. The logs showed Aegis ships sitting silently while wars raged around them, watching empires attack each other and choosing not to interfere, holding position while trade convoys passed, within kilometers of their hidden hulls, never reaching out, never disrupting, never taking advantage of the extraordinary intelligence they could have gathered. They had been guardians, not conquerors, and the proof was in the decades of restraint that no conqueror would have been capable of. When the logs finished playing, Mwangi made his offer to the galaxy. Humanity would take its seat on the Galactic Quorum as a full member with veto power. Humanity would extend its mutual defense pact to any species that chose to sign, not just the great empires, but the minor species, the unaffiliated colonies, the forgotten worlds that had never had anyone to protect them. And in exchange, humanity asked for one thing: a single binding galactic law, a law against wars of conquest, a law that stated that any signatory who launched an unprovoked invasion would lose its quorum seat and face a collective response from every other signatory, including humanity. Final words were spoken softly, but they reached every corner of the chamber and every corner of the galaxy beyond it. "We did not build Aegis to rule," he said. "We built it so that no one else could rule unopposed. We are offering you the one thing none of you have ever had, a galaxy where strength is not the only currency that matters. But we will not force it on you. You have to choose." The room was silent for a very long time. Archon Sylvan of the Orani hegemony cast her vote first, rising slowly from her ancient seat with the careful movements of a being who had lived for thousands of years, and her voice carried the weight of every one of them. "We have been the architects of order for 10,000 years, she said. "Perhaps it is time to try a different design." She voted yes. The Silthari Concord voted yes, their hive queens recognizing in humanity's proposal the same principle that governed their own civilization, the protection of the collective above the ambition of the individual. The Dreth Confederacy voted yes, after a calculation that took less than 3 seconds, because stable galaxies were good for business, and unpredictable wars were not. The Yithon Collective voted yes, with a single condition: that they retain control of the Galactic Communications Network. And humanity agreed without hesitation, because they had never needed it. The Velkarath Dominion voted no, and their new warlord premier stood and walked out of the chamber without another word, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. It did not matter. The motion passed, and the agreement that was signed that day became known as the Elysium Accords, named for the small colony world where a single ship had stepped out of the darkness and changed everything. 1 year later, the galaxy was different. Not perfect, not peaceful in every corner, not free from tension or suspicion or the lingering resentment of empires. Had been humbled, but fundamentally and irreversibly changed in ways that could not be undone. Minor species were expanding for the first time in centuries, building new colonies on worlds they had never dared to claim before, protected by the Accords, and by the silent presence of ships they could not see but knew were there. The Velkarath Dominion, isolated and economically weakened by its refusal to sign, was fracturing from within, as moderate factions grew louder and more powerful, pushing for reconciliation, arguing that pride was a poor substitute for prosperity. And everyone who watched the internal politics knew it was only a matter of time before the Dominion joined the Accords. Captain Marin Cole stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, stationed openly now in the Elysium system, visible to anyone who looked, no longer hiding in the shadows she had called home for so many years. She was not sure how she felt about being seen. Darkness, the simplicity of watching without being watched, the quiet purpose of standing guard over a galaxy that did not know she was there. A communication alert pulled her from her thoughts. It was a short-range signal from a Velkarath frigate that had crossed into human space, not on an attack vector, not with weapons armed, but slowly, carefully, the way someone approaches a door they are not sure they are welcome to open. The Velkarath captain was young, far too young to have fought at Elysium, and his transmission was brief and carried the unmistakable sound of someone who had made a decision that terrified him, but that he knew was right. He was requesting asylum. Cole looked at the transmission for a moment, then opened a channel and told in he was welcome, and that medical and support teams would meet him at the station, and that he had nothing to fear. She closed the channel and stood quietly on her bridge, looking out at the stars. Somewhere far away, in the vast and silent dark between galaxies, another gravity anomaly shimmered for just a fraction of a second. a ripple in the fabric of space so faint that only the most sensitive instruments in the galaxy could have detected it. And then it went still again. It was out there, watching, waiting, patient and hidden and ready, hoping with every passing moment that it would never need to be anything more than a shadow in the void. But prepared, always prepared, just in case. Because that was what humanity did best. They hoped for the best, and they built for the worst, and they carried the weight of their own power with the quiet understanding that the truest measure of strength was not in the ability to destroy. It was in the choice, made again and again and again, not to.